The morning sun cast long shadows across the drawing room of Townshend Manor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air like tiny prisoners seeking escape. Barbara Townshend sat perfectly poised on the settee, her hands folded in her lap, her emerald eyes fixed on the Persian carpet beneath her feet. She had learned in these 2 years since her father's remarriage that stillness was survival, that invisibility, though impossible for someone of her striking appearance, was the closest thing to safety she could achieve. "You will not attend the Worthington ball this evening," Celine announced, sweeping into the room with the practiced grace of a woman who had studied every movement before a mirror. The Viscountess wore a gown of deep burgundy silk, cut in the latest fashion from London, her dark hair arranged in elaborate coils that must have taken her maid hours to perfect. She was beautiful, Barbara acknowledged silently. Beautiful in the way a porcelain doll is beautiful, cold and perfect and utterly hollow. "But father said," Barbara began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father," Celine interrupted, her lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes, "has reconsidered. He agrees with me that your presence would be inappropriate, given recent circumstances." Barbara's heart sank. There were no recent circumstances, there never were. But Celine had perfected the art of creating scandals from shadows, of weaving implications from innocent actions, of poisoning her father's mind with whispered half-truths in the dark hours of night, when men were most vulnerable to manipulation. "What circumstances?" Barbara asked, though she knew better than to expect a straight answer. Celine crossed to the window, her movements deliberate, theatrical. "Lady Hartwell mentioned to me just yesterday that she observed you speaking with Lord Ashton at the theatre, alone in the corridor for quite some time." "I was not alone," Barbara protested, her composure finally cracking. "Father was standing not 10 feet away, and Lord Ashton merely asked after my health. The conversation lasted barely 2 minutes. 2 minutes that felt like an eternity to those watching," Celine countered, turning to face her stepdaughter with eyes that glittered like shards of ice. "2 minutes during which you laughed. Quite loudly, I'm told, drawing the attention of half the theatre. Really, Barbara, such behavior. Your dear mother would be mortified." The mention of her mother struck like a physical blow. Barbara felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not give Celine that satisfaction. Her mother, Elizabeth Townshend, had been warmth and kindness incarnate. She had taught Barbara that true beauty came from compassion, that grace was in generosity, that a lady's worth was measured not by her appearance, but by the content of her character. Elizabeth would not have been mortified by her daughter's laughter. She would have rejoiced in it. But Elizabeth was 3 years dead, taken by a fever that came swift and merciless. And in her grief, Paul Townshend had sought comfort in the arms of a woman who saw his vulnerability as opportunity. "I will speak to father myself," Barbara said, rising to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. "You will do no such thing." Celine's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Your father is already distressed by your behavior. I have spent the morning soothing his worries, assuring him that your wildness is simply a phase that will pass with proper guidance. Do not upset him further, Barbara. His health, as you know, is delicate." It was a lie. Her father's health was robust, but it was Celine's favorite weapon, the suggestion that any opposition, any attempt by Barbara to defend herself, would somehow harm Paul Townshend. It kept Barbara silent, compliant, trapped in a nightmare of her own family's making. "I understand," Barbara whispered, defeated. "Good." Celine's smile widened, triumphant. "Now, I believe you have needlework to attend to. In your chamber, away from the windows, if you please. We wouldn't want the neighbors getting ideas about your availability." Barbara fled the drawing room, her vision blurred with unshed tears, her throat tight with words she could never speak. She climbed the grand staircase, the same staircase where her mother had once chased her laughing when she was a child, and retreated to her bedchamber, the only space in Townshend Manor that still felt like a sanctuary. The room was lovely, preserved exactly as it had been when her mother was alive: pale blue walls, white lace curtains that filtered the sunlight into something soft and dreamlike, a carved mahogany bed with posts that reached toward the ceiling like the columns of a cathedral. Books lined the shelves, her mother's collection, treasured volumes of poetry and philosophy and history that Barbara had read and reread until she could recite whole passages from memory. She crossed to the window and gazed out at the gardens below. Once they had been her mother's pride, a riot of roses and lavender and honeysuckle that perfumed the air and attracted butterflies that danced among the blooms. Now, under Celine's direction, the gardeners had torn out the cottage flowers and replaced them with severe symmetrical hedges and imported exotic plants that looked impressive but had no scent, no life, no soul. Like Celine herself, Barbara thought bitterly. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Enter," she called, composing herself. The door opened to reveal Mary, her lady's maid, one of the few servants who remained from her mother's time, and one of the few people in the household who showed Barbara genuine kindness. "Miss Barbara," Mary said softly, her weathered face creased with concern, "I've brought your tea." "Thank you, Mary." Barbara managed to smile. "Though I suspect Celine will soon decide I don't deserve even that small comfort." Mary set the tea tray on the small table near the fireplace and lingered, twisting her hands in her apron. "Begging your pardon, miss, but it's not right. What's happening to you? The whole staff sees it, the way she treats you, the way she's turned your father against his own daughter." "There's nothing to be done," Barbara said, though the sympathy in Mary's eyes nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "Father loves her. He believes everything she tells him." "Love?" Mary scoffed. "That woman doesn't know the meaning of the word. What she feels for your father is possession, nothing more, and what she feels for you—" She broke off, shaking her head. "Is jealousy," Barbara finished quietly. "I know, Mary. I've always known." It had started almost immediately after the wedding. At first, Barbara had tried to befriend her stepmother, had genuinely hoped that they might find companionship in their shared loss. For Celine, too, was a widow, or so she claimed. But Barbara had quickly learned that Celine saw her not as a potential daughter, but as a rival. It was in the way Celine's expression would sour whenever Barbara entered a room, the way she would interrupt any conversation Barbara attempted with her father, the way she would insist on accompanying Barbara to every social event, hovering like a dark shadow, inserting herself into every interaction until gentleman caller after gentleman caller made their excuses and fled. And then, when Barbara's natural beauty and genuine kindness continued to attract admiration, despite Celine's interference, the campaign of isolation had begun. First, the restrictions on her social engagements for her own good, Celine assured Paul, because Barbara was too trusting and needed protection from fortune hunters. Then, the whispered rumors that traveled through drawing rooms and ballrooms, nothing specific, nothing Barbara could directly refute, just vague implications that there was something not quite proper about Paul Townshend's daughter. Now at 21, Barbara found herself a prisoner in her own home, her reputation tarnished by insinuation, her relationship with her father poisoned by lies, her future dimming with each passing day. "There's talk below stairs," Mary said, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "About the Worthington ball tonight. They say the Duke of Montfort will be in attendance, just returned from his estates in Yorkshire." Barbara's heart gave an unexpected flutter. She had never met the Duke of Montfort, though his reputation preceded him. Samuel Montfort was said to be one of the wealthiest men in England, his dukedom ancient and his influence considerable. He was also said to be intelligent, discerning, and utterly uninterested in the frivolous games of London society. At 32, he remained unmarried, despite being considered the most eligible bachelor in the realm. "Why would that matter to me?" Barbara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Celine has already forbidden me from attending." "That's just it, miss." Mary's eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. "Cook heard from the Worthingtons' housekeeper that the Duke specifically asked if you would be in attendance. Seems he met your mother years ago and remembered her kindness. He wished to pay his respects to her daughter." Barbara's breath caught. Someone who had known her mother. Someone who remembered Elizabeth Townshend, not as the ghost who haunted these halls, but as the vibrant, compassionate woman she had been. The longing to meet this person, to hear stories about her mother from someone who had admired her, was almost overwhelming. "It doesn't matter," she said, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "Celine will never allow it." "Perhaps," Mary said slowly, "you might find a way to attend, without her permission." Barbara stared at her maid in shock. "Mary, I couldn't possibly—" "Couldn't you?" Mary challenged, her usual deference falling away. "Miss Barbara, you're 21. a grown woman, and whether her ladyship likes it or not, you're still Paul Townshend's daughter. You have every right to attend a ball if you choose. Father would be furious. Would he? Or would Celine convince him to be furious? Mary moved closer, her expression earnest. What's the worst that could happen, miss? She's already taken everything from you. Your freedom, your social standing, your relationship with your father. She keeps you locked away like a shameful secret. How much worse can it get? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and tempting. Barbara walked to her wardrobe and opened it, revealing the gowns that hung inside like the ghosts of a former life. Beautiful creations in silk and satin, most of them gifts from her mother, all of them unworn for nearly a year because Celine had deemed them inappropriate or too ostentatious, or simply found reasons why Barbara should not leave the house to wear them. Her fingers brushed against a gown of pale gold silk, the color of champagne with delicate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. Her mother had commissioned it for Barbara's 18th birthday, saying the color made her eyes glow like emeralds, and her hair, a rich chestnut brown, shined like polished mahogany. "Help me dress, Mary," Barbara said suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm going to that ball." Mary's face broke into a wide smile. "That's my girl. Your mother would be proud." As her maid helped her into the golden gown, Barbara felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 long years. Hope. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps she would pay dearly for this small rebellion. But the prospect of meeting someone who had known her mother, of spending even one evening outside the suffocating confines of Townshend Manor, was worth any price. She studied her reflection in the mirror as Mary arranged her hair, pinning it up in an elegant style that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She saw what Celine saw, the delicate features, the luminous skin, the natural beauty that needed no artifice to enhance it. But she also saw what her mother had taught her to see, strength in the set of her jaw, intelligence in her eyes, character in every line of her face. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary whispered. "Every inch your mother's daughter." Barbara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and made a decision that would change the course of her life. She would go to the Worthington Ball. She would meet the Duke of Montfort, and for one evening she would remember what it felt like to be Barbara Townshend. Not Celine's victim, not her father's disappointment, but the woman her mother had raised her to be, the woman she was determined to become again. The journey to Worthington House was accomplished with a mixture of subterfuge and good fortune. Celine and Paul had left for the ball an hour earlier, Celine resplendent in emerald silk that must have cost a small fortune, Paul looking vaguely uncomfortable in his formal attire. Barbara had waited, her heart pounding, until their carriage disappeared down the drive before slipping out through the servants' entrance. Mary had arranged for a modest carriage, paid for with coins Barbara had saved from her small allowance, and now Barbara sat in the darkness, watching the London streets pass by her window, alternating between exhilaration and terror at what she was about to do. Worthington House blazed with light, every window glowing golden against the night sky. Music drifted on the evening air, a waltz, played by what must be a full orchestra. Carriages lined the street, footmen and drivers waiting patiently while inside. The cream of London society danced and laughed and played their eternal games of status and matrimony. Barbara's hands trembled as she descended from her carriage. She had no chaperone, no companion, no protection if Celine discovered her presence. She was entirely alone, armed only with her courage and the memory of her mother's voice, telling her that she deserved happiness, deserved freedom, deserved to live. "Miss?" The Worthington butler greeted her at the door, his expression professionally neutral, though his eyes widened slightly at her unaccompanied state. "May I announce you?" "Miss Barbara Townshend," she said, lifting her chin with a confidence she didn't quite feel. If the butler found anything unusual about Paul Townshend's daughter arriving separately from her father and stepmother, he was too well trained to show it. He led her through the entrance hall and to the top of the grand staircase that swept down into the ballroom. "Miss Barbara Townshend," he announced in a voice that carried over the music. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The orchestra played on, but half the dancers seemed to lose their rhythm, stumbling slightly as they stared at the young woman standing at the top of the stairs. Barbara descended slowly, acutely aware of every eye upon her. She saw familiar faces, ladies she had once called friends, gentlemen who had once paid her court, matrons who had known her mother. She saw surprise, speculation, and in some faces, genuine pleasure at her unexpected appearance. She also saw Celine. Her stepmother stood near the refreshment table, a glass of champagne frozen halfway to her lips. Her face transformed into a mask of such pure rage that Barbara nearly turned and fled. Beside her, Paul Townshend looked merely confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of his daughter's presence. But before Celine could move, before the moment could shatter, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that his evening coat emphasized rather than concealed. His hair was dark, nearly black, and his eyes, as they met Barbara's, were a startling shade of blue that seemed to see directly through her carefully maintained composure to the frightened woman beneath. His features were strong, aristocratic, handsome in a way that suggested character rather than mere symmetry. "Miss Townshend," he said, his voice deep and warm, as he reached the bottom of the staircase and offered his hand. "I am Samuel Montfort. I had hoped for the honor of meeting you this evening. Might I have the pleasure of this dance?" Barbara's breath caught. The Duke of Montfort, here now, offering her his hand, and whether he knew it or not, his protection from Celine's wrath. She placed her hand in his, feeling the strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. "The honor would be mine, Your Grace," she managed to say, and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. As the music swelled and Samuel Montfort's arm came around her waist, Barbara caught a glimpse of Celine's face in the crowd. Her stepmother looked as though she had swallowed poison. And in that moment, as the Duke swept her into the waltz with practiced grace, Barbara couldn't help but smile. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. Samuel Montfort was not a man easily impressed. At 32, he had spent over a decade navigating the treacherous waters of London society, fending off ambitious mothers and their calculating daughters, distinguishing genuine character from practiced performance, and developing a reputation for being able to see through deception with unnerving accuracy. It was a skill born of necessity. When one was a duke with considerable wealth and influence, one learned quickly that most smiles were manufactured, and most compliments were currency. But as he held Barbara Townshend in his arms, gliding across the Worthington ballroom in 3/4 time, Samuel found himself genuinely captivated. Not by her beauty, though she was undeniably lovely. The golden gown brought out the warmth in her skin, and her chestnut hair caught the candlelight in ways that made it seem to glow from within. No, what held his attention was something far more compelling, the contradiction between the grace with which she moved and the shadow of fear that flickered in her remarkable green eyes. "You dance beautifully, Miss Townshend," he observed, noting how she followed his lead effortlessly, as though they had partnered 100 times before. "Thank you, Your Grace. My mother insisted I have the finest instruction." A small smile touched her lips at the memory, but it faded quickly, replaced by a wariness that seemed at odds with the social setting. "Your mother was Lady Elizabeth Thornton before her marriage, was she not?" Samuel guided her through a turn, using the movement to position them away from the watchful eyes he'd noticed tracking their every move, particularly those of the Viscountess in emerald silk, whose expression could have curdled milk. Barbara's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like relief. "You knew her?" "Briefly but memorably. I was all of 20, fresh from Cambridge, and thoroughly convinced of my own importance. Your mother attended a garden party at my family's estate. She was already married to your father then, and you were a little girl playing on the lawn. I made some pompous pronouncement about the poor, suggesting they were largely responsible for their own misfortune, and your mother very politely but very thoroughly dismantled every point of my argument." He smiled at the memory. "She did it with such kindness that I couldn't even be offended. I merely felt educated. It was a novel experience for a young duke who was accustomed to having his every word treated as wisdom." "That sounds exactly like her," Barbara said, and this time her smile reached her eyes, transforming her face from merely beautiful to luminous. She believed that privilege came with responsibility, that those of us blessed with comfort and security had an obligation to those less fortunate. "A philosophy you seem to have inherited." Samuel had made inquiries about Barbara Townshend before this evening. His sources had painted a picture of a young woman known for her charity work, her kindness to servants, her genuine interest in people regardless of their station. They had also mentioned in carefully worded phrases that she had become increasingly reclusive over the past 2 years, rarely appearing in society, despite being at the perfect age for securing an advantageous marriage. The wariness returned to her eyes. "I'm afraid I have little opportunity to practice such philosophy these days, Your Grace. My circumstances have changed since my mother's passing. So, I understand." The waltz was coming to an end, and Samuel made a decision. "Miss Townshend, would you do me the honor of taking a turn about the terrace? I find the ballroom rather stifling." He saw her hesitation, saw her glance toward the corner where her father and stepmother stood in what appeared to be a heated, whispered conversation. The Viscountess's face was flushed with barely contained fury, while Viscount Townshend looked increasingly distressed. "I shouldn't," Barbara said quietly. "My presence here is already causing difficulty." "Then let us cause a bit more," Samuel replied, surprising himself with the impulse that drove the words. "I suspect you have weathered far greater difficulties than this, Miss Townshend. And I promise you, as long as you are in my company, no one will dare offer you anything but the utmost respect." Something shifted in her expression, a spark of defiance that he suspected was the true Barbara Townshend, the woman who existed beneath the layers of caution and suppression. "Very well, Your Grace, though I warn you, you may find yourself at the center of a scandal simply by association with me." "I have weathered scandals before," Samuel said lightly, offering his arm. "I believe I shall survive this one." They moved through the crowd toward the terrace doors, and Samuel was acutely aware of the whispers that followed in their wake. The Duke of Montfort, showing marked attention to Barbara Townshend, the Viscount's mysterious daughter who had virtually disappeared from society. It would be the talk of every drawing room in London by tomorrow afternoon. Good, Samuel thought with satisfaction. Let them talk. The terrace was blessedly cool after the heat of the ballroom, the night air carrying the scent of roses from the gardens below. Other couples strolled in the lamplight, maintaining proper distances, engaging in the ritualized flirtation that characterized courtship among their class. Samuel led Barbara to a corner partially shielded by a potted orange tree, offering a measure of privacy while remaining entirely proper. "Your Grace," Barbara began, her voice low and urgent, "I must thank you for your kindness this evening, but I should not monopolize your time. There are many ladies here who would flutter their eyelashes and compliment my title and bore me to tears within 5 minutes," Samuel interrupted. "I did not ask you to dance out of pity, Miss Townshend, nor am I keeping your company out of obligation. I am here because I find you far more interesting than anyone else in that ballroom." She stared at him, clearly unsure how to respond. In the lamplight he could see the exhaustion that her careful grooming couldn't quite conceal, the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clasped together as though she were holding herself upright by sheer will. "Tell me," Samuel said gently, "what has happened to Paul Townshend's daughter in the 2 years since London last saw her? I remember you from your come-out season. You were much sought after, beautiful, accomplished, and genuinely kind. A rare combination, yet you vanished as surely as if you had been spirited away to a convent." Barbara's composure, so carefully maintained, began to crack. "I cannot discuss, that is, it would be inappropriate to speak of family matters with someone I've only just met. Perhaps. Or perhaps you've been taught to believe that your suffering should remain silent, that asking for help is shameful, that enduring cruelty is noble." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I may not know you well, Miss Townshend, but I know the woman who raised you. Lady Elizabeth would never have wanted her daughter to suffer in silence." A tear escaped down Barbara's cheek before she could stop it. She turned away quickly, her hand rising to dash it away, but Samuel had already seen it, and the wall of reserve finally crumbled. "She hates me," Barbara whispered, the words tumbling out as though a dam had broken. "My stepmother. She hates me because men look at me, because people remember my mother fondly and compare us, because I exist and she wishes I did not." "Celine Townshend," Samuel said, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. He had made a point of observing the Viscountess this evening. He had seen how her eyes tracked Barbara with an intensity that suggested obsession rather than concern. He had noted the way she positioned herself between her stepdaughter and potential admirers. He had recognized with the clarity of someone who had studied human nature extensively that Celine's feelings toward Barbara went beyond mere dislike into something far darker. "She has convinced my father that I am wild, improper, a source of shame to the family," Barbara continued, her words coming faster now, as though she feared if she stopped, she would never find the courage to speak again. "She manipulates every situation to make me appear in the worst possible light. If I speak to a gentleman, I am flirting shamelessly. If I smile at a servant, I am being inappropriately familiar. If I express any opinion, I am being willful and disobedient. And your father believes these accusations. He believes everything she tells him." The pain in Barbara's voice was palpable. "He loved my mother desperately. When she died, something broke in him. He was drowning in grief, and Celine presented herself as salvation. She was attentive, sympathetic, seemingly devoted to easing his pain. By the time he realized, if he has realized, that her devotion is to his title and wealth rather than to him, it was too late. He had already married her. And you were left to bear the consequences of his mistake." Barbara met his eyes, and in her gaze Samuel saw not just pain, but steel, a core of strength that had been tested and had not broken. "I should not be telling you this. You must think me terribly improper, speaking so frankly about family matters to a stranger." "I think you brave," Samuel corrected, "and I think you have borne far more than any young woman should have to endure alone." He paused, considering his next words carefully. What he was about to say went beyond the bounds of propriety, beyond the careful social dance that governed interactions between unmarried men and women of their station. But propriety had failed Barbara Townshend. Convention had imprisoned her. Perhaps what she needed was someone willing to break the rules on her behalf. "Miss Townshend," he said, his voice firm with decision, "I would like to call upon you. Properly, formally, with your father's permission and your stepmother's knowledge. I would like to court you if you are amenable." Barbara's mouth fell open in shock. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly. That is, you don't know me. We've only just met. And Celine would never—" "Celine Townshend does not dictate my choices," Samuel said, his tone hardening, "nor should she dictate yours. As for knowing you, I know enough. I know you are Elizabeth Thornton's daughter, raised with kindness and intelligence. I know you have survived 2 years of systematic cruelty without losing your compassion. I've heard how you treat the servants, how you continue charitable works whenever you are permitted. I know you are brave enough to defy your stepmother's orders to attend this ball, which suggests a spirit that refuses to be completely crushed. That is enough for me to wish to know more." "But why?" Barbara's voice was barely a whisper. "I have no fortune of my own. My mother's money went to my father, and Celine controls the household accounts. My reputation has been damaged by rumor and isolation. I bring you nothing but complications and a stepmother who will despise you for paying me attention." Samuel smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his typically serious features. "I am a duke, Miss Townshend. I am the wealthiest man in 3 counties. I have more influence than I know what to do with, and a title that goes back 6 generations. What I don't have, and what I have searched for these past 10 years, is someone real. Someone who understands that life is more than social position and political maneuvering. Someone who sees people rather than pawns." He reached out and gently took her hand, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through him. "You asked what you bring me? You bring yourself. That is more than enough." Barbara stared at him, tears streaming freely now, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. "I don't understand. Men of your station don't. They marry for alliance, for fortune, for advantage, not for genuine regard," Samuel finished. "Perhaps that's the problem with our entire society. Perhaps that's why half the marriages of the ton are miserable exercises in mutual tolerance." He squeezed her hand gently. "I will not lie and claim to be in love with you, Miss Townshend. We have only just met, but I am intrigued by you. I am drawn to you. And I believe, given time and opportunity, I could come to care for you very deeply. Is that not enough foundation for courtship?" "It is more than I dared hope for," Barbara admitted, her voice breaking. "But Celine will do everything in her power to prevent our association," Samuel agreed, "which is precisely why we must act with determination. I will call upon you tomorrow afternoon. I will be unfailingly polite to your stepmother and absolutely insistent on spending time with you. If she objects, I will speak directly to your father. If he objects, I will make it clear that his objections are noted, but will not deter me. I am a duke, Miss Townshend. Your father is a viscount. The social calculus is entirely in our favor." For the first time since he'd met her, Barbara laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. "You make it sound so simple." "Simple? No. But achievable? Absolutely." Samuel smiled at her, feeling something unfamiliar and rather wonderful stirring in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of something that might one day become love. "Now, let us return to the ballroom before your stepmother has an apoplectic fit, and let us make certain that everyone in London society knows that the Duke of Montfort has chosen to pay particular attention to Miss Barbara Townshend." They walked back into the ballroom together, and Samuel immediately led her into another dance. This time a country dance that required they separate and rejoin, allowing him to observe her interaction with other partners. He watched as she smiled politely at Lord Carrington, saw how she navigated the steps with innate grace, noted how other gentlemen's eyes followed her movements with admiration tinged with curiosity. He also watched Celine Townshend. The Viscountess stood rigid near the wall, her champagne glass gripped so tightly, Samuel was surprised it didn't shatter. Her eyes tracked Barbara with an intensity that was almost predatory, and when the dance brought Samuel and Barbara back together, Celine's expression hardened into something that looked very much like hatred. Good, Samuel thought grimly. Let her hate. Let her rage. It changes nothing. The evening progressed, and Samuel made a point of introducing Barbara to his friends. Lord Henley, whose wife was known for her charity work, and the Marquis of Dartmoor, whose sharp wit and sharper observations made him one of Samuel's most trusted confidants. Both men and their wives were gracious to Barbara, and Samuel saw her begin to relax, to laugh more freely, to emerge from the shadow of fear that had cloaked her when she first entered the ballroom. It was nearly midnight when Viscount Townshend finally worked up the courage, or was pushed by his wife, to approach. Samuel saw him coming and positioned himself directly beside Barbara, a silent statement of allegiance. "Barbara," Townshend said, his voice strained, his face flushed with wine and discomfort. "Your stepmother tells me you arrived this evening without permission. This is highly irregular." "Father," Barbara replied, her voice steady though Samuel could feel her trembling beside him, "I received an invitation. As I am 21 and unmarried, it seemed appropriate to accept." "Without a chaperone? Without informing us of your intentions?" Townshend's eyes darted to Samuel, clearly uncertain how to proceed in the presence of a duke. "Your daughter has been in my company for the majority of the evening," Samuel interjected smoothly. "I assure you, Townshend, her reputation has been quite safe. Indeed, I intend to call upon her tomorrow to properly request your permission to court her." The effect of these words was extraordinary. Townshend's mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes bulging slightly. Behind him, Celine had gone white as death, her carefully applied rouge standing out against her suddenly pallid skin like wounds. "Your Grace," Townshend stammered, "this is most unexpected. I had no idea you were considering, that is, Barbara has not mentioned." "We only met this evening," Samuel said pleasantly, "but I am not a man who requires extensive contemplation when I recognize quality. Your daughter is accomplished, intelligent, and possesses a character that does credit to her mother's memory. I should be honored if you would permit me to know her better." Townshend looked helplessly at his wife, clearly awaiting instruction. Celine's face had transformed from white to mottled red, her jaw clenched so tightly Samuel could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. But even Celine Townshend was not foolish enough to openly object to a duke's attentions. "Of course, Your Grace," Celine said through gritted teeth that tried to simulate a smile. "We would be honored by your interest in our dear Barbara." Our dear Barbara. The possessive phrase made Samuel's skin crawl. Barbara was not theirs. She was being held hostage by them. "Excellent," Samuel said. "Then I shall call at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Miss Townshend, would you be available at that time?" "I shall make certain she is," Celine answered, before Barbara could speak, her eyes promising retribution even as her voice dripped false honey. Samuel ignored her, keeping his attention fixed on Barbara. Miss Townshend? Barbara lifted her chin, and Samuel saw the woman she might become if freed from Celine's influence. Strong, confident, magnificent. I shall look forward to it, Your Grace. The evening ended shortly after, with Barbara departing in her modest hired carriage before her father and stepmother could insist she return with them. Samuel watched her leave, then deliberately made the rounds of the ballroom once more, ensuring he mentioned to Lady Hartwell, Mrs. Pennington and the Duchess of Somerset, the three greatest gossips in London, that he was quite taken with Miss Townshend and intended to pursue courtship. By tomorrow evening, all of London would know, and that knowledge would be Barbara's protection. As Samuel's own carriage carried him home through the dark streets, he reflected on the evening's events. He had come to the Worthington ball with mild curiosity and a vague intention to pay respects to his old acquaintance's daughter. He was leaving with something far more significant, a purpose. Samuel Montfort had spent 12 years as a duke, learning to manage estates, navigate politics, and fulfill the obligations of his rank, but he had never felt truly needed. His tenants needed his management, yes, and Parliament needed his vote, but no one had needed him. Samuel, the man beneath the title, Barbara Townshend, needed him. Not his title, not his wealth, not his influence, though all those things would help. She needed someone to see her, to stand beside her, to tell her that she was worth fighting for. And Samuel discovered, rather to his surprise, that he needed her as well. He needed her honesty in a world of deception. He needed her kindness in a society that prized cleverness over compassion. He needed her courage, the courage of someone who continued to be good despite every reason to become bitter. Tomorrow he would begin the campaign to win not just her hand, but her heart, and to free her from the gilded cage that trapped her. Celine Townshend would fight him every step of the way. Samuel was certain of that, but the Viscountess had made a critical error. She had assumed that her cruelty to Barbara would remain hidden, that the walls of Townshend Manor would keep her secret safe. She had not counted on Samuel Montfort, and she had not counted on the fact that a duke who had finally found something worth fighting for was a formidable adversary indeed. The morning after the Worthington ball dawned grey and cold, with rain threatening from clouds that hung low over London like a sodden blanket. Barbara woke to the sound of raised voices, her father's rumbling bass, and Celine's higher, sharper tones cutting through the walls of her bedchamber like knives. She had expected this, had known even as she danced in Samuel Montfort's arms that there would be consequences for her defiance. But the memory of the evening, the kindness in the Duke's eyes, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the revolutionary promise that she might be worth fighting for, gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. Mary entered without knocking, her face pale with worry. "Miss Barbara, her ladyship is in a terrible state. She's been ranting since dawn. Your father tried to calm her, but she's inconsolable." "What is she saying?" Barbara asked, though she could guess. "That you've humiliated the family, that you manipulated the Duke into paying attention to you, that you're trying to ruin her standing in society." Mary moved to the wardrobe, pulling out a morning dress of soft grey muslin. "She's also saying, begging your pardon, miss, that the Duke's interest cannot possibly be genuine, that you must have used inappropriate behaviour to capture his attention." Barbara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame but from anger. Of course, Celine would twist the situation into something sordid. The Viscountess could not conceive of a man being genuinely attracted to Barbara's character, so she invented scandal where none existed. "Help me dress, Mary," Barbara said quietly. "If I'm to face the dragon, I should at least be properly armoured." 20 minutes later, dressed and coiffed with as much dignity as her trembling hands would allow, Barbara descended the stairs to the morning room where breakfast was customarily served. She could hear Celine's voice growing louder as she approached. "Completely out of control, Paul. You must see that this cannot continue. The girl is willful disobedient, and now she's attempting to trap a duke into marriage through the most obvious schemes." "Now, my dear," Paul Townshend's voice was placating, weary. "The Duke approached Barbara, not the other way around. Lord Dartmoor himself told me that Montfort was quite taken with her. Surely that's a good thing, a duke, Celine. Our daughter could be a duchess." "She is not your daughter," Celine hissed, and Barbara froze outside the door, her hand on the handle, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She is the spawn of that sanctimonious woman who had you wrapped around her finger. Elizabeth's precious daughter, who everyone compares me to. Elizabeth's perfect angel, who makes me look like the villain simply by existing." There was a long silence. Then Paul's voice, colder than Barbara had heard it in years. "You will not speak of Elizabeth in that manner." "Or what?" Celine's laugh was brittle, edged with hysteria. "You'll defend her memory. You'll take your daughter's side against me. We both know you won't, Paul. You need me. You need what I give you, the social connections, the respectability, the appearance of a proper household. Without me, you're just a second-rate viscount with dwindling funds and a too beautiful daughter who reminds you every day of the wife you lost." "Celine, no." The Viscountess's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Let us speak plainly for once. You know as well as I do that Barbara has become a problem. She's too lovely, too accomplished, too much like Elizabeth. People look at her and see what I am not. Gentlemen flock to her and barely notice me. Even the servants prefer her to me. I've seen how they look at her with sympathy, as though I'm the cruel stepmother in some fairy tale." "Perhaps," Paul said slowly, and Barbara's heart broke at the pain in his voice. "Because you have been cruel to her. I've tried not to see it, Celine. I've told myself that your discipline was for Barbara's own good, that your restrictions were reasonable. But last night when I saw her in that ballroom, truly saw her for the first time in 2 years, I realized what I've done, what I've let you do." Barbara's breath caught. Could it be possible? Was her father finally seeing the truth? "What you've let me do," Celine's voice rose to a shriek. "I have saved this family from scandal. That girl was running wild, attracting every fortune hunter in London with her looks and her false sweetness. I have protected her, protected you, protected all of us from her recklessness. By locking her away? By spreading rumors about her own daughter? By turning me against my own child?" Paul's voice shook. "Last night, the Duchess of Somerset asked me why I had hidden Barbara away like a shameful secret. She said the entire ton had wondered what terrible thing Barbara had done to deserve such treatment. And I had no answer, Celine. Because the truth is, she has done nothing. Nothing but remind you that beauty and goodness are gifts, not achievements, and that no amount of expensive gowns or strategic manipulation can manufacture what she possesses naturally." "How dare you?" Something crashed, a teacup perhaps, thrown against a wall. "I will not be spoken to this way. I am your wife. I am the Viscountess Townshend. And Barbara is my daughter," Paul roared, and Barbara heard what sounded like a fist striking the table. "My daughter Celine, Elizabeth's daughter. The child I have betrayed and abandoned because I was too weak to see what you were doing. But I see it now, and it ends today. Barbara should have announced her presence then, should have entered the room. But she remained frozen, barely breathing, as her father finally stood up for her. "You're making a mistake," Celine said, her voice turning cold and calculated. "If you side with her, if you allow this courtship with Montfort to proceed, you will regret it. I have friends, Paul. Influential friends. And I have information about your finances, about certain indiscretions from your past that could make life very difficult for you. Are you threatening me?" Paul's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm reminding you of reality. You think Montfort's interest will protect Barbara? He's a duke. He could have any woman in England. What makes you think his fascination with your common daughter will last beyond a few weeks? Men like him don't marry girls like her. They amuse themselves and move on, and when he does, Barbara will be ruined. Not just isolated as she is now, but truly ruined. No decent man will want her, and you will have me to thank for preventing that fate. Or," Paul countered, "Montfort is genuine in his interest. Barbara becomes a duchess, and you lose your hold over this household entirely. Which is what truly terrifies you, isn't it? Not that Barbara will be hurt, but that she'll be happy. That she'll succeed despite your efforts to destroy her." Barbara heard footsteps, Celine pacing, most likely, trying to regain control of the conversation. When the Viscountess spoke again, her voice had changed, become softer, more seductive. It was the voice Barbara had heard her use on Paul countless times, the voice that transformed her from harpy to siren. "Paul, my darling, you're upset. Understandably so. It was a difficult evening for all of us. But surely you know I only want what's best for this family. For you." The sound of rustling fabric, of Celine moving closer to him. "I love you. Everything I do is out of love for you. Can't you see that? Don't. Paul's voice was firm. Don't try to manipulate me, Celine, not now. Not when I finally see clearly. You see what you want to see. All pretense of sweetness vanished from Celine's voice. Fine. Allow the courtship. Let Montfort dance attendance on your precious daughter. But mark my words, Paul, I will not make it easy for them. If Barbara wants the Duke, she'll have to earn him. And I'll be watching every moment, waiting for her to make a mistake. One slip, one impropriety, one moment that I can twist into scandal, and I will destroy any chance she has at happiness. This I swear to you. Barbara had heard enough. She pushed open the door and stepped into the morning room, her head high, her hands steady, despite the turmoil in her heart. Both her father and Celine turned to stare at her. Paul looked haggard, older than his 45 years, his face lined with guilt and regret. Celine looked like a cornered animal, beautiful still, but with something feral in her eyes that made Barbara's blood run cold. "Good morning, father," Barbara said calmly. Celine. She deliberately did not use the title stepmother, a small defiance that made Celine's eyes narrow dangerously. Barbara. Paul stepped forward, his hands reaching for her, then falling helplessly to his sides. "My dear child, I don't know what to say. I've been—" His voice broke. "I've been a terrible father to you." "You've been a grieving husband," Barbara said gently, though her throat was tight with emotion. "You missed Mother. I understand that, Father. I miss her too. Every day. That doesn't excuse—" Paul shook his head. "I should have protected you. From rumors, from isolation, from—" His gaze flickered to Celine, who stood silent and rigid, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "I should have been paying attention." "You're paying attention now," Barbara said. "That's what matters." "How touching," Celine interjected, her voice dripping venom. "The prodigal daughter returns, and suddenly all is forgiven. How very convenient. Just in time for the Duke's visit this afternoon." "About that," Paul said, straightening his shoulders as though preparing for battle. "Barbara will receive the Duke in the drawing room. You and I, Celine, will be present as chaperones. But we will not interfere. We will be courteous, welcoming, and we will give Barbara the opportunity to know Montfort better without—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Without undue interference." "Undue interference," Celine repeated flatly. "Is that what you call proper supervision of an unmarried young woman? I call it what it is, giving my daughter the chance I should have given her 2 years ago, the chance to be courted, to be admired, to make her own choices about her future." Paul moved to Barbara's side, and though he didn't quite embrace her, the gesture of solidarity was clear. "And if Montfort proves unworthy of her, I will be the one to send him away, not you." Celine's composure finally shattered. "You'll regret this," she spat, all pretense of civility abandoned. "Both of you will regret this. I have made you, Paul Townshend. Your position in society, your connections, your respectability, all of it comes through me. Without me, you're nothing. And your daughter—" She turned her vicious gaze on Barbara. "Your daughter is a foolish girl playing at being sophisticated. Montfort will see through her soon enough, and when he does, she'll have nothing. No prospects, no reputation, nothing but the memory of a duke who took pity on her for an evening and then moved on to someone more suitable." "If that's what you truly believe," Barbara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, "then you have nothing to fear from this courtship. It will end naturally, and I will be no threat to you." "But you don't believe that," Celine hissed, stepping closer. "You think he actually cares about you. You think your pretty face and your dead mother's memory will be enough to hold a duke's attention. You're wrong. Men like Samuel Montfort marry for alliance and advantage. They don't marry the penniless daughters of minor viscounts, no matter how lovely those daughters might be." "Then let us see," Barbara replied. "If you're correct, you'll have the satisfaction of watching me fail. And if you're wrong—" She paused, allowing herself a small smile. "Then I suppose we'll all learn something about what truly matters to men of quality." The look Celine gave her then was one of pure hatred, so intense that Barbara actually took a step back. She had known her stepmother disliked her, had even understood that jealousy played a role in that dislike. But this was something else entirely, a loathing so deep and consuming that it seemed to radiate from Celine like heat from a fire. "This isn't over," Celine said softly, her voice all the more menacing for its quietness. You think you've won because your father has finally grown a spine. You think the Duke's interest protects you, but I have 2 years of practice in making your life miserable, Barbara. 2 years of learning exactly which pressures to apply, which fears to exploit, which weaknesses to target. And now, instead of having to hide my actions, I'll have a legitimate reason to scrutinize your every interaction with Montfort. One mistake, just one, and I will make certain he sees you exactly as I see you, a manipulative child playing games far beyond her understanding. With that, Celine swept from the room, her silk skirts rustling like the warning rattle of a serpent. Barbara's knees went weak, and she sank into the nearest chair. Paul moved to her side immediately, his hand coming to rest awkwardly on her shoulder. She means it, Barbara whispered. Every word. She'll do everything in her power to destroy this before it begins. I know, Paul admitted, his voice heavy with guilt and resignation. She's not the woman I thought I was marrying. Or perhaps she is, and I was too blinded by grief and loneliness to see what was right in front of me. He knelt beside Barbara's chair, taking her hands in his. His palms were sweaty, trembling slightly. I failed you, Barbara. Failed you and your mother's memory. Can you ever forgive me? Barbara looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw not the distant, disapproving figure he'd become over the past 2 years, but the man who had once spun her around his study until she was dizzy with laughter, who had taught her to ride, who had read to her every night before bed. Grief had transformed him, had made him vulnerable to Celine's manipulations, but grief had not destroyed him entirely. The man her mother had loved was still there, buried beneath guilt and poor decisions. I forgive you, father, she said, squeezing his hands, but now we must be practical. Celine will do everything she can to sabotage my courtship with the Duke. We need to be prepared. Paul nodded slowly, rising to his feet. I'll speak to the staff. Make it clear that any reports about you, anything that could be twisted or used against you, should come directly to me, not to Celine, and I'll be present for all of Montfort's visits. I won't let her manufacture scenarios or create scandals where none exist. Thank you, father. Barbara stood as well, straightening her dress with hands that were steadier now. But we should prepare for the possibility that Celine will act outside the household. She mentioned having influential friends. What did she mean by that? Paul's expression darkened. Lady Whitmore, primarily. A widow with more money than sense and a vicious tongue. She and Celine have become close this past year. I suspect Celine has been feeding her gossip, building alliances in case she ever needed them. If Celine wants to spread rumors about you and Montfort, Lady Whitmore would be her primary weapon. Then we need our own allies, Barbara mused. The Duke introduced me to Lord and Lady Henley last night, and the Marquess of Dartmoor and his wife. Perhaps you should trust Montfort to handle his own circles, Paul suggested. He's a duke, Barbara. His social influence far exceeds anything Celine can muster. If he's genuine in his interest, and I believe he is after speaking with several gentlemen who witnessed his attention to you, then he'll be aware of the potential for rumor and will take steps to protect your reputation. It was sound advice, and Barbara nodded. But as she excused herself to prepare for the Duke's afternoon visit, she couldn't shake the image of Celine's face in that final moment. The hatred, yes, but also something else. Determination. The Viscountess had not become the woman she was by accepting defeat gracefully. She had clawed her way from obscure widow to Viscountess Townshend through manipulation and strategic cruelty. She would not surrender her position, her influence, or her control without a fight. And Barbara, despite her brave words and her father's support, knew that she was entering a battle far more dangerous than any ballroom dance. At precisely 3 o'clock, the Duke of Montfort's carriage pulled up before Townshend Manor. Barbara watched from her bedchamber window as Samuel descended, looking every inch the aristocrat in his perfectly tailored coat and pristine cravat. But it was the expression on his face that caught her attention, determined, almost stern, as though he were preparing for combat rather than a social call. Perhaps he was. Mary had dressed Barbara in a gown of soft blue muslin that brought out the green in her eyes, and had arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary whispered, "as beautiful as I've ever seen you." Barbara studied her reflection and saw not beauty but armor, The carefully applied powder that hid the shadows beneath her eyes, the strategic pins that made her hair appear effortlessly styled when in fact it had taken 40 minutes to achieve the look, the dress that flattered her figure while remaining entirely proper and modest. She was preparing for war, same as the Duke. The knock at her door came from one of the footmen. "Miss Barbara, the Duke of Montfort has arrived and is waiting in the drawing-room." "Thank you, Henry. Please inform His Grace that I shall be down momentarily." She took a final deep breath, squared her shoulders, and descended to meet whatever fate awaited her. The drawing-room of Townshend Manor had been her mother's favourite space, decorated in soothing shades of cream and gold, with large windows that let in abundant light, and a pianoforte in the corner that Elizabeth had played beautifully. Celine had changed nothing about the room, and Barbara often wondered if her stepmother left it as it was out of respect for the dead, or because she knew that seeing her mother's space every day was a subtle form of torture. Samuel stood near the fireplace, examining a portrait of Elizabeth Townshend that hung above the mantel. He turned as Barbara entered, and his expression softened immediately. "Miss Townshend," he said, bowing, "thank you for receiving me. Your Grace, the honour is mine." Barbara curtsied, acutely aware of Celine seated in the corner, her embroidery hoop in her lap, her eyes tracking every movement. Paul stood near the window, attempting to appear casual but clearly tense. "I hope you don't mind," Samuel said, gesturing to the portrait, "but I was admiring your mother's likeness. The artist captured her kindness, I think. It's in the eyes." "Mr. Hastings painted it the year before she died," Barbara replied, moving to stand beside him. Together they gazed up at Elizabeth's face, forever frozen at 42, forever smiling that gentle smile. Mother said he made her look too saintly, that she was far more flawed than the painting suggested. But Father insisted on that version, and Mother never could deny him anything. "She was beautiful," Samuel observed, "but you have her look even more than the portrait does. The same directness in your gaze, the same hint of steel beneath the gentleness." It was an odd compliment, and Barbara glanced at him in surprise. Most men commented only on her physical resemblance to her mother. Samuel was seeing something deeper, character traits, essential qualities that went beyond appearance. "Your Grace is very observant," she said quietly. "I make it a practice to observe carefully," Samuel replied. "One never knows what important details one might miss otherwise." His gaze flickered to Celine, a look so brief Barbara almost missed it, but pregnant with meaning nonetheless. "Perhaps we might sit," Paul suggested, moving forward with determined cheerfulness. "Celine, my dear, ring for tea." The next hour was an exercise in civilized torture. Samuel sat opposite Barbara, maintaining perfect propriety while managing to convey through subtle glances and carefully chosen words that he was entirely aware of the hostile atmosphere and utterly undeterred by it. He spoke of his estates in Yorkshire, of his work in the House of Lords, of his interests in agricultural reform and education for the poor, topics that revealed him to be a man of substance and genuine concern for his responsibilities. Barbara responded in kind, discussing the charitable work she had done before her isolation, her love of reading, her interest in history and philosophy. She was careful to moderate her enthusiasm. Celine had often criticized her for being too passionate about intellectual topics, claiming it made her appear unfeminine, but Samuel seemed to encourage rather than discourage her opinions. "Have you read Mr. Malthus's essay on population?" he asked at one point. "I have," Barbara replied, "though I found his conclusions rather pessimistic. Surely human ingenuity and compassion can overcome the resource constraints he predicts." "An optimist," Samuel said with a smile. "How refreshing. Most people simply accept Malthus's gloom as inevitable." "Most people," Celine interjected sweetly, "don't presume to have opinions on complex economic matters beyond their understanding. Barbara has always been rather opinionated. I'm sure it comes from reading too many books without proper guidance." The insult was delivered with a smile, wrapped in concern, making it impossible for Barbara to respond without appearing defensive. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and lowered her eyes to her teacup. "On the contrary," Samuel said, his voice cooling noticeably, "I find Miss Townshend's opinions both informed and thoughtful. One might argue that too few women are encouraged to engage with complex topics." Our society would benefit from more females with the courage to form and express educated views. Celine's smile froze on her face. Score one for the Duke, Barbara thought with grim satisfaction. The visit continued in this vein, Samuel asking Barbara substantive questions, Barbara responding with genuine interest and intelligence, and Celine interjecting subtle insults disguised as concern. Each time Samuel deflected or countered with perfect politeness, making it clear without ever being overtly rude that he saw through every word the Viscountess spoke. Finally, as the clock struck 4, Samuel rose to take his leave. "Miss Townshend, I wonder if you might permit me to call again. Perhaps tomorrow. I'm hosting a small gathering at my townhouse, just a few friends and some rather accomplished musicians. I would be honored if you and your family would attend." It was a masterstroke, an invitation to a duke's home witnessed by Paul and Celine, given publicly enough that refusing would be a direct insult. Barbara watched Celine's face transform through several expressions, fury, calculation, forced pleasantness, before settling on a smile so patently false it was almost comedic. "How gracious of you, Your Grace," Celine said. "We would be delighted to attend." "Excellent." Samuel turned to Barbara, taking her hand and bowing over it. His lips barely brushed her glove, but Barbara felt the warmth of the gesture through the fabric. "Until tomorrow, Miss Townshend. I find I am already anticipating our next conversation." After he departed, the room fell into tense silence. Paul looked relieved. Celine looked murderous. And Barbara felt something she had not experienced in 2 long years. Genuine hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her life might be about to change. But she also felt fear. Because Celine's face, as she watched the Duke's carriage disappear down the drive, promised that the real battle was only beginning. The gathering at Montfort House was unlike anything Barbara had experienced in her isolated years. Samuel's London residence was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture, all clean lines and classical proportions, filled with light from tall windows and decorated with art that spoke of cultivation and taste rather than ostentation. But it was the atmosphere that struck Barbara most forcefully, the genuine warmth with which Samuel greeted his guests, the intellectual curiosity that animated the conversations, the complete absence of the social pretension that characterized most ton gatherings. "Miss Townshend, may I introduce you to my sister, Lady Eleanor Fairfax?" Samuel guided Barbara toward a woman in her late 20s with kind eyes and her brother's same direct gaze. "I've been longing to meet you," Eleanor said warmly, taking both of Barbara's hands in hers. "Samuel has spoken of nothing else since the Worthington ball. You've quite captivated my famously impervious brother." Barbara felt herself blushing. "Lady Eleanor, you're too kind. I'm sure His Grace simply is standing right here and can speak for himself," Samuel interjected with amusement. "And yes, I am quite captivated. I make no attempt to hide it." Over the following weeks, Samuel's courtship of Barbara was methodical, public, and absolutely ruthless in its effectiveness. He called upon her at Townshend Manor 3 times a week, always bringing small gifts, a book he thought she'd enjoy, flowers for her sitting room, sheet music for the pianoforte. He invited her and her family to dinners, concerts, and gallery exhibitions, always ensuring they were seen together by the most influential members of society. More importantly, he talked with her, not at her as so many men did, but with her, asking her opinions, challenging her ideas, treating her intelligence as an asset rather than an oddity. Barbara found herself falling in love not with his title or his wealth or even his handsome face, but with the man who saw her as a complete person rather than merely a beautiful ornament. But with each passing day, Celine's campaign of sabotage intensified. It began with small things. Barbara's finest dresses mysteriously developed tears or stains just before Samuel's visits. Her invitations to events would disappear, only to be found too late to respond. Celine would schedule conflicting engagements and then express loud disappointment when Barbara had to choose between them. Then the rumors began, whispered suggestions that Barbara was too forward with the Duke, implications that her isolation had been due to scandalous behavior, insinuations that she was fortune-hunting, that she had set her cap at Montfort through calculated manipulation. "Lady Whitmore told me the most distressing thing," one matron confided to another in Barbara's hearing at a musicale. "She heard from the Viscountess Townshend herself that Miss Barbara has been quite aggressive in her pursuit of the Duke. Apparently, She even attended the Worthington ball without permission, knowing he would be there. Samuel heard the rumours too, of course. London society was small, and gossip travelled at the speed of malice. But instead of withdrawing, he increased his attentions. He made a point of dancing with Barbara at every ball, of sitting beside her at dinner parties, of praising her publicly and often. "They're saying I'm chasing you," Barbara told him during a rare private moment in the Townshend garden, where Mary stood at a discreet distance as chaperone. "That I'm manipulating you through feminine wiles." "Let them say it," Samuel replied calmly. "Anyone who knows me, truly knows me, understands I am not a man to be manipulated, and those who don't know me don't matter. But your reputation is entirely secure. I'm a duke, Barbara. Society forgives dukes a great deal." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture of comfort. "What concerns me is your reputation. Celine is being very clever. She's not saying anything directly slanderous, just creating an atmosphere of doubt, making people wonder. What can we do?" Samuel's smile was wolf-like. "We can accelerate matters, force her hand before she's ready." 3 days later, at a ball hosted by the Duchess of Somerset, Samuel requested a private audience with Barbara's father. Paul, who had grown increasingly aware of his wife's machinations and increasingly ashamed of his complicity in Barbara's suffering, agreed immediately. They met in the Duke of Somerset's library, with the Duke and Duchess present as witnesses. Samuel was direct. "Viscount Townshend, I wish to marry your daughter. I am asking for your permission to propose to her." Paul's eyes widened. They had been courting for only 6 weeks. "Your Grace, this is rather sudden." "Is it?" Samuel countered. "I'm 32 years old. I've spent over a decade searching for a woman of substance, intelligence, and genuine character. I found her in your daughter. I see no reason to delay simply because society expects a longer courtship. But Barbara, have you discussed this with her? Does she return your feelings?" "I believe she does, though I confess I wish to secure your permission before declaring myself fully. But Townshend, let us be honest with each other. Your daughter is not safe in your house. Your wife—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Lady Townshend has made it abundantly clear that she views Barbara as a threat to her own position. The sooner Barbara is removed from that environment, the better for everyone." Paul's face flushed with shame. "I know I've failed her, failed to protect her from Celine's jealousy and cruelty. If you can offer her safety and happiness, then you have my blessing. More than that, you have my gratitude." Samuel proposed that very evening, in the Townshend garden beneath a sky full of stars, with Mary once again serving as chaperone and Eleanor Fairfax having mysteriously arrived to lend propriety to the occasion. "Miss Townshend, Barbara," Samuel began, taking both her hands in his, "I am not a man given to flights of romantic fancy, but I am a man who recognizes value when he sees it. You are strong, intelligent, compassionate, and brave. You have endured years of cruelty without becoming cruel yourself. You have been isolated, but have not grown bitter. You are, in short, the finest woman I have ever known. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Barbara's vision blurred with tears, happy tears for the first time in so long. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Samuel, 1,000 times yes." He slipped a ring onto her finger, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, the stone the exact shade of her eyes. And then, propriety be hanged, he kissed her. It was Barbara's first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed a kiss could be, tender and passionate, gentle and claiming, full of promise for the future they would build together. When they broke apart, Eleanor was beaming, Mary was crying openly, and Barbara felt as though she might float away with sheer joy. But they all knew the hardest part was yet to come. Telling Celine. The confrontation happened the next morning in the drawing room of Townshend Manor. Samuel had insisted on being present, and Paul, in a rare display of backbone, had agreed. They faced Celine together, father, daughter, and duke, while the Viscountess stood alone, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. "You cannot be serious," Celine said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You've known each other barely 2 months." "Long enough to know we suit," Samuel replied calmly. "The engagement is official as of this morning. The announcement will appear in tomorrow's papers." "No." Celine's composure cracked. "I won't allow this. Barbara is too young, too foolish." Barbara is 21, Paul interrupted. A woman grown, and I have given my blessing to this match. Your blessing? Celine turned on her husband with venom. You mean you've given away the one thing of value in this house? The one person who gave us any social standing worth having? You mean the one person whose beauty and goodness threatened your position? Samuel said coldly. Let us dispense with pretense, Lady Townshend. You have spent 2 years trying to destroy Barbara through isolation and rumor. You have poisoned her relationship with her father, damaged her reputation, and made her a prisoner in her own home. All because you could not tolerate the fact that men preferred to look at her rather than you. That society admired her rather than you, that she was everything you pretended to be but never were. Celine's face went white with fury. How dare you speak to me? I dare because someone must speak the truth, Samuel continued relentlessly. You are a manipulator and a liar. You married Townshend for his title and wealth, not out of affection. You saw Barbara as an obstacle to be removed rather than a daughter to be loved. And you have failed, Lady Townshend. Despite your best efforts, Barbara has not been crushed. She has not become bitter. She has survived you, and now she will thrive, far beyond your reach. She'll be a terrible duchess, Celine spat. She knows nothing of managing a great household. She has no experience with the responsibilities. She has more grace and genuine nobility in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire body, Samuel shot back. And she will learn what she needs to learn, supported by people who actually care for her, rather than seeing her as competition. Celine turned desperately to Paul. You're going to let him speak to me this way? You're going to let him take her? Paul met his wife's gaze steadily, and for the first time in 2 years, Barbara saw her father as he had been before grief had broken him. Strong, decisive, certain. I'm going to let my daughter marry a man who loves her and will protect her from those who wish her harm, even if, especially if, those people live under my own roof. Then you're both fools, Celine shrieked. She'll make a mockery of his title. She'll humiliate him with her common ways and her pathetic attempts to seem educated. Men like him tire of women like her. He'll be unfaithful within a year, keeping mistresses while she sits at home wondering where her perfect romance went. Barbara had remained silent throughout the exchange, but this accusation stung enough that she finally spoke. You're wrong, Celine. But even if you weren't, even if Samuel did tire of me, even if this marriage proves less than perfect, I would still choose it. I would still choose 1 year of happiness and respect over a lifetime of being your prisoner. Something in Celine seemed to break at those words. Her face crumpled, and for one strange moment, Barbara almost felt pity for her, because beneath the anger and manipulation, there was genuine pain, the pain of a woman who had built her entire identity on being desired and admired, only to discover that such things could not be manufactured or controlled. Get out, Celine whispered. All of you, get out of my sight. With pleasure, Samuel said. He offered Barbara his arm. Come, my dear. We have wedding plans to make. As they left Townshend Manor for what would be the final time Barbara lived there, she felt the strangest mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly, and joy at the future awaiting her, but also sadness for her father, who would have to live with the consequences of his poor choices, and surprisingly a measure of compassion for Celine, who would spend the rest of her life trapped in the prison of her own jealousy and insecurity. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, at St. George's Church in Hanover Square, with all of London society in attendance. Barbara wore a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to Samuel's grandmother, altered to fit her perfectly, with orange blossoms in her hair and a veil of the finest Brussels lace. Paul walked her down the aisle, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered as they reached the altar. I'm sorry I failed you for so long, my dear girl, but I'm so glad you found happiness despite my failures. I love you, Father, Barbara replied, squeezing his hand, and I forgive you. Samuel stood waiting for her, devastatingly handsome in his formal attire, but it was the expression on his face that made Barbara's heart soar. Love, pride, and something that looked remarkably like awe, as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. The ceremony was beautiful. The breakfast afterward was magnificent. But the moment Barbara treasured most came hours later, when she and Samuel finally had a moment alone in the carriage taking them to Montfort Abbey, his ancestral estate in the country where they would spend the first weeks of their marriage. Happy? Samuel asked, pulling her close. Deliriously so, Barbara admitted. Though I confess I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for Celine to appear and snatch it all away. She has no power over you now, Samuel assured her. You are a duchess, Barbara, my duchess, and I promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you never feel trapped, controlled, or diminished again. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength, these are gifts I intend to celebrate every single day. Barbara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the last of her fears dissolve. I love you, Samuel. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you asked me to dance and saw past my fear to the person beneath. I love you too, Samuel murmured against her hair. My brave, brilliant, beautiful Barbara. As the carriage rolled through the countryside toward their future, Barbara thought about all that had happened, the suffering, the isolation, the battle against Celine's cruelty. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that true strength lay in remaining kind, despite having every reason to become bitter. She thought about her father, who had finally found his courage again, even if too late to prevent all her pain. But mostly, she thought about the man beside her, the Duke who had seen her truly, who had fought for her publicly, who had chosen her not despite her scars, but with full knowledge of them, who had transformed her from prisoner to partner, from victim to victor. What are you thinking? Samuel asked. That Celine was wrong, Barbara replied with a smile. She thought I would be ruined without her approval, that I could never be more than the isolated girl she tried to make me. But she forgot something important. What's that? That I am my mother's daughter. And my mother taught me that we create our own worth, that love is stronger than jealousy, and that genuine goodness will always eventually triumph over calculated cruelty. Barbara lifted her face for a kiss. Celine tried to destroy me. Instead, she only made me stronger, strong enough to recognize real love when it found me. Samuel kissed her then, long and deep, and in that kiss, Barbara felt every promise of the future they would build together, a future of partnership and respect, of children who would be raised with love and security, of work and purpose that would give meaning to her days. She had been trapped in a gilded cage, controlled by a woman who saw her as nothing more than competition, but she had broken free. And in breaking free, she had found not just escape, but genuine happiness. The happiness of being seen, being valued, being loved exactly as she was. The carriage rolled on through the summer twilight, carrying the Duke and Duchess of Montfort toward home, toward life, toward a love that would last long after the last echoes of Celine's jealousy had faded into nothing. 3 years later, the gardens of Montfort Abbey were in full bloom, roses and lavender and honeysuckle, creating a tapestry of colour and scent that reminded Barbara powerfully of her mother's beloved gardens at Townshend Manor. She had recreated them here, with Samuel's enthusiastic support, and now spent hours among the flowers with her daughter, 2-year-old Elizabeth, named for the grandmother she would never meet, but whose legacy lived on in every kind act, every thoughtful word. "Mama!" Little Elizabeth toddled toward her, clutching a slightly crushed daisy. "Pretty, very pretty, darling," Barbara agreed, scooping up her daughter and spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. Samuel appeared on the terrace, their infant son cradled in his arms. "There are my girls," he called with a smile. "And here is your brother, who has just woken up and is demanding his mother quite insistently." Barbara carried Elizabeth back to the terrace and traded her for the baby. Paul Samuel Montfort, named for both grandfathers, currently making imperious noises that suggested feeding time had arrived. She settled into a chair to nurse him, Elizabeth climbing into Samuel's lap. And for a moment they were simply a family, content in each other's presence. "I had a letter from Father this morning," Barbara said as Paul Samuel nursed contentedly. "He's finally taken the step he's been contemplating. He's filing for separation from Celine." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "After all this time? What prompted it?" Apparently, Celine made the mistake of directing her venom toward someone with more power than she anticipated, the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough. She spread some rumor about the Duchess's granddaughter, and Her Grace responded by cutting Celine entirely from society. Without social standing, Celine's hold over Father finally broke. Barbara's expression turned thoughtful. "He says he plans to retire to the country, away from London and all its memories. He wants to know if he might visit, to meet his grandchildren properly. What do you want? Samuel asked. Knowing her history made this a complicated question. Barbara looked at her children, her daughter playing with her father's watch fob, her son nursing peacefully, both of them the very picture of security and love. I want him to know them, she decided. He made terrible mistakes, but he was also my mother's great love, and in the end he tried to make amends. That has to count for something. Then he's welcome here, Samuel said firmly, with one condition. Celine is never to set foot on Montfort property. Not now, not ever. Agreed, Barbara said with feeling. They had heard little of Celine since the wedding. Cut off from the social connections she had cultivated so carefully, facing separation from a husband who finally saw her clearly, the former Viscountess had retreated to a small estate Paul had provided. More than she deserved, Barbara thought, but enough to keep her housed and fed. Gossip suggested Celine spent her days in bitter isolation, seeing no one, mourning the life and status she had lost through her own cruelty. Barbara felt no satisfaction in her stepmother's downfall, but neither did she feel guilt. Celine had made her choices. She had chosen jealousy over compassion, cruelty over kindness, control over love, and those choices had consequences. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we hadn't met? Samuel asked, watching her with that penetrating gaze that still made her heart flutter. Sometimes, Barbara admitted. I think I would have survived. I'm my mother's daughter, after all. But I wouldn't have thrived, I wouldn't have this. She gestured to encompass their children, their home, their life together. I wouldn't have known that love could be partnership, that marriage could be based on genuine regard and respect rather than convenience or control. I think about it too, Samuel confessed, about what my life would have been without you. I would have continued as I was, managing my estates competently, voting conscientiously in Parliament, fulfilling all my ducal obligations with perfect correctness. But I would have been lonely, Barbara, surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone. You showed me what it means to be truly seen by another person, to be loved not for what I can provide, but for who I am. Paul Samuel had finished nursing and was making sleepy baby sounds. Barbara lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently until he burped with great satisfaction. Elizabeth had fallen asleep in Samuel's lap, her small hand still clutching his watch fob. We should get them inside for proper naps, Barbara said softly, not wanting to break the spell of the moment but aware that children's needs waited for no one. As they carried their sleeping children into the house, Barbara caught sight of her reflection in the entrance hall mirror. No longer the frightened girl who had climbed the Worthington staircase 3 years ago, but a woman confident in herself and her worth, the Duchess of Montfort, a wife, a mother, a person who had been tested by jealousy and cruelty, but had emerged stronger, kinder, more certain of what truly mattered. She thought of Celine sometimes, in the way one might think of a storm that had passed, with relief at having survived it, but without the anger that once would have consumed her. Celine had been her great trial, but also, in a strange way, her great teacher. She had learned through her stepmother's cruelty exactly what kind of person she didn't want to become. She had learned that beauty without kindness was empty, that social standing without integrity was meaningless. That control motivated by fear ultimately controlled no one but oneself. Most importantly, she had learned that love, real love, saw past surfaces to souls, that the right person would value her for her strength, her intelligence, her compassion, rather than merely her appearance. And she had found that person in Samuel, who loved her not despite her scars, but with full knowledge of them. That evening, after the children were properly asleep in the nursery, Barbara and Samuel walked through their gardens as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Happy?" Samuel asked, as he had asked her so many times over the past 3 years. "Deliriously so," Barbara replied, as she always did. But this time she added, "You know, I used to dream about escaping, about running away from Townshend Manor, from Celine's cruelty, from everything that made me feel small and trapped. But what I found was so much better than escape." "What did you find?" "Home," Barbara said simply. "Not just a place, but a person. You're my home, Samuel. You and our children and the life we've built together. Celine tried to take everything from me, my freedom, my dignity, my future. But she couldn't take the person I was inside, and that person found you. Samuel pulled her close, and they stood together in the fading light, breathing in the scent of roses and honeysuckle, listening to the evening song of birds, wholly content in the knowledge that they had found what so many searched for and never discovered. A love built not on passion alone but on genuine partnership, deep respect, and the certain knowledge that they were better together than either could ever be apart. In London, Celine Townshend sat alone in her reduced circumstances, nursing her bitterness and her regrets. In his country estate, Paul Townshend began the slow process of making peace with his failures and his lost years. And at Montfort Abbey, Barbara and Samuel built a life of meaning and joy, raising their children with the love and security that every child deserves, and proving every day that genuine goodness will always triumph over calculated cruelty. Her stepmother had controlled everything, her life, her father, her very existence for 2 painful years, but she had never controlled, could never control, the one thing that mattered most, Barbara's heart. And that heart had chosen love, chosen Samuel, chosen a future bright with promise and possibility. It was, Barbara thought as she and Samuel returned to the house hand in hand, the very best kind of triumph, not victory over an enemy, but victory for love, for hope, for the belief that no matter how dark the night, morning always comes at last. And what a glorious morning it had turned out to be. The end. Dear listener, if you have lived many years and weathered many storms, know this: Barbara's story, though set in a different time and place, speaks to a timeless truth. There are people in this world who will try to diminish you, control you, make you feel small and worthless. They do this not because of any lack in you, but because of a profound lack in themselves. But you are stronger than their cruelty. You are more valuable than they could ever make you believe. And somewhere, somehow, love is waiting for you. Maybe romantic love, maybe the love of friends or family, maybe simply love of yourself and your own worth. Hold fast to your goodness. Hold fast to your strength. Hold fast to the knowledge that you deserve happiness, respect, and the freedom to become whoever you were meant to be. The gilded cage can be escaped. The cruel stepmother, literal or metaphorical, can be overcome. And on the other side of suffering lies not just survival, but the possibility of genuine joy. May you find your happiness. May you recognize real love when it finds you. And may you never stop believing that you are worthy of every good thing this life has to offer. With hope and affection from one who believes your best days are still ahead. The Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of Barbara's unforgettable story. If her journey moved you, from silence to strength, from control to freedom, from heartbreak to a duke's loving arms, we kindly invite you to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves beautiful, redemptive love stories. From the bottom of our hearts, your support means the world to us. It's what keeps us inspired to write and narrate new tales filled with love, healing, and powerful emotional transformations. And don't forget, at the end of this video, another story from our channel will appear. Click it and get swept away by another emotional romance that will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.